Welcome to the SPEAKPact podcast, where high-performing speakers and the producers who hire them merge to give you the insider secrets to the lucrative speaking industry. Antoniette Roze, your podcast host and celebrated speaker agent, unveils insider success strategies. Discover a nexus of thought leaders and bookers, maximizing your potential in each and every episode. Your ticket to ultimate speaking success begins right here. Catch the transformative insights waiting for you on the SPEAKPact podcast, hosted by the industry powerhouse herself, Antoniette Roze.
Welcome back to SpeakPact. I am thrilled that you are here with us today. And today we have Dr. Rick Goodman, who knows the speaking industry firsthand. He has devoted a great portion of his career to figuring out the ins and outs, and he's here today to synthesize that for you. So welcome to the stage, Dr. Goodman.
Thanks so much for having me, Antoniette.
Well, I am excited about some of the topics that we're going to dive into. I'll first share a little bit about who you are and what your background is, and then we will dive right in. For those listening to us live, be sure to pop in any questions on whatever platform that you're listening, and we will try to answer them right here. All right, so Dr. Rick Goodman is a world-renowned leadership expert and keynote speaker who has transformed audiences in all 50 states and 32 countries. He's an author of multiple books, including Solutions-Oriented Leader. He helps organizations build high-performance cultures that drive engagement, accountability, and bottom-line results. Rick's practical, research-backed strategies empower leaders and teams to navigate change, communicate effectively, and create championship success in today's constantly evolving workspace. So a lot of accolades for his credentials. But what I find even more interesting, Dr. Goodman, is the fact that you're in a pretty crowded space, leadership. Like every other speaker speaks on quote unquote leadership, yet you've really carved out a space for yourself. You're a prolific speaker. You also got tens of thousands of people following your work. How did you set yourself apart? What were some of those first steps, maybe those early steps that set you in a little bit different trajectory so that you could get to the position that you are now?
I think you just, one, have to know what you want to be when you grow up. And I ask people that all the time, and most people answer 20 to 70 years old and they say, I don't know. And I say, you're not coming back, maybe as a fish or a frog, but not as you. So I think it was one of the first times, just as a doctor, there was a mentor that I had and I saw him on stage. I said, I'd love to do that. And then I saw Brian Tracy and the same thing. And, I decided that I was going to go and travel and speak. And my wife at the time said, who's going to hire you? And so you could either listen to people on the outside or listen to yourself. And, so I started to travel around the country and do full day programs and learning things. And I would sell Psychology of Achievement, Brian Tracy's, album. And I always said to people that if you drive a lot and if you're in your car, you can get a 2-year college education in 6 months sitting in your car. And I listened to all these programs and tapes and just learned and, just absorbed it all. And now Brian Tracy's on the back of my book. And I always kid him and say, I've sold more Psychology of Achievements than you have. But I think I don't look at it that it's a crowded space. I think that too many people worry about everybody else and what they're doing. It's like Facebook. You see everybody's best day of their life out there. And my daughter always says, you don't know the backstory. So people didn't see 650 programs that I did for $240 a day and a $90 a day per diem, and then went back to being a doctor on the weekends, so to speak, because this is what I wanted to do. And I still keep a stack of every single hotel, every single place I've ever been, so I could show my kids, you've got to put the wood in, so I'm a 30-year overnight success. My first.
Okay. You said some really key things, Dr. Goodman, that are they're so foundational, but in today's kind of society, for some reason, people want to skip those steps and you can't. First of all, Know what you want to be when you grow up. Right. So we start every client with a non-negotiables interview, right? We can build, you can be brilliant, you can be really good at what you do, but if you build a castle you don't want to live in, you're going to be miserable. You see a lot of people who've made massive successful lives and they implode, they self-implode, right? Because they're not happy with where they're at. They didn't check in with those non-negotiables. And as you evolve, as your career evolves, those non-negotiables evolve. So know what you want to be to grow when you grow up, but then as you're growing up, check back in and make sure you're still on the path to creating the life and the career and the impact and the revenue that is truly still passionate to you, truly still important to you. So
It's no different than if we're flying from, I'm down here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and we're flying to Hawaii. Do we just go west? We've got to adjust for wind speed, rain, other planes. So we're constantly, zigzag until we kind of get to where we want to go. But, just like Covey says, begin with the end in mind. You have to know what you want your outcome to be. And I can tell you the first time I gave a speech and my staff taped me in the first 5 minutes, I probably said 150 times. And you will see me speak for 2 hours on the stage and you'll never hear an But I think you also need to know what it is that you want to say. There's times when I'll stop and I just look at the audience and I'll say, I've got you all. And then I'll say, could you tell I'm having fun? Because if you're just mailing it in, people can tell. So, and we all don't have our best days, but as a professional, you've got to go out there and people expect you to be the best, and give them their all, no matter what's going on. And I like to say, it's kind of like my mother would be screaming at all of us and she'd say, Audrey, Ricky, Lori, and the phone would ring and she'd go, hello. And it was like she was on stage, but that's kind of how it is. And there's so many steps that you can take in getting to that place. But the first is you have to decide, what is it that you're good at? And when I wrote The Solutions-Oriented Leader, everybody knows, I always say I didn't write The Solutions-Oriented Follower. I have difficulty following, but I've always just been innately in that place where I like leading. And then, I've had the opportunity to work with professional athletes and Super Bowl and NBA champions to see them go from, terrible to winning a championship and seeing that, we're all the same. We all put our pants on one leg at a time. So when my daughter says, you don't know the backstory, the truth is, everybody goes through this same thing. And, speakers tend to hang out with each other because we get each other, because we've all been through, I always say you've either made it and lost everything, so to speak, or you've come from nothing, or God forbid, you've had some serious injury and then you've got to talk about that, which I choose not to be in that.
Well, you said two things I don't want to gloss over. I'd like to camp out there for a moment. Everything was so on point. But the two things that really stood out to me is, number one, start imperfect. Right? Don't wait to have everything perfect before you begin. Scrappy's the new perfect. Progress, not perfection. You started when you were still saying the ums, right? And now you are a polished speaker. But if you would have waited to become a polished speaker, it would have never happened. You had to start.
Perfect takes too long. I want perfect in my
takes too long.
surgeons. I want perfect in my surgeons. Other than that, you just go for it. There's two types of people I say in this world, and I give the two examples. And one is, I used to play hockey in college, so I will rollerblade down Hollywood Beach here, and it's like a 9-mile boardwalk. And if there's people in the bike lane, there's two types of people. There's the type of people that will look at me, freeze like a deer in the headlights, and can't get out of the way, and these other people that get out of the way. Or if you've ever been down in Florida, they have these torrential downpours. But it could rain on one side of the street, not the other. And you'll see this torrential downpour and people will pull the side of the road. And I just keep going because I know in 100 yards, it could be like the Wizard of Oz and everything opens up and it's beautiful. So really, what is your, what's the bottom line? You don't have a choice. You move forward. And that's, it's like when someone says, I'm going to try to do that. There's no such thing as a try. Take a CD, stick it in your car, try to turn it on. Either do or you don't. It's like saying I'm almost pregnant. And most people just don't want to take that leap. But every time I hesitate to do something and then I go for it and it works, I beat myself up because I say, I'm so stupid. What was I waiting for? So in our house, we say risk a yes. Risk a yes. What's the worst thing that can happen? If you don't ASK, you won't GET. You got a 50-50 shot. If the person says no, you're in the same spot you were 30 seconds before. And if they say yes, you went to the next level. But we've all been in that place where we said, no, they're never going to go for it. And they say yes, and you're shocked. And then you get upset that why didn't you do it sooner? So why not just risk a yes, see what happens, and you know, you're going to be in the same spot no matter what, or you're going to improve your situation. And most people are afraid, you know, and you got to put yourself back in those times when you were afraid and you did go for it, and how'd you feel? So there's one thing that I use, it's called a victory book. And
Victory.
it's a little spiral bound notebook that I bought, and I wrote victory on the outside with a magic marker. And in it, I write every single thing that I've ever accomplished, because most of us have forgotten some of the things we've accomplished. Maybe we didn't think we were going to pass a test in school, or we weren't going to do these things, or, you know, and we've overcome those, but we forget. And then we get into another situation. And for me, I like to go back to that book and say, you know what, I felt like that then. I'm feeling like that now, but I was able to do it. This is how I'm built, and I just move forward. And it's my book of references, so to speak, because a lot of us have forgotten some of those things that we went through, or the worst days of our lives. And I remember going through one of the worst days of my life, and my friend said to me, you know, you're going to laugh about this every day. And I said, I will never laugh about this. And a year later, I was throwing a party in Fort Lauderdale on my balcony on July 4th. And I looked at him, I said, I laugh every single day, because you can't see it sometimes when you're in it. So my job for people is to kind of, what I say, get them up in the helicopter, because there's three phases. And the first phase is it's all about me. And that's when you start, woe is me and why me, and which is the worst thing you could ever ask. And the second is you're kind of butting heads. And the third is you get up in the helicopter. So it's like when they had the earthquake in Haiti, phase one was everybody said, oh, they need supplies. And then they threw all these supplies at them. And then phase two, all the supplies were sitting on the tarmac and everybody's arguing what to do. And phase three, the president sent in the helicopters with the Marines, and they can get up top and see the distribution points. Well, when you can get out of yourself and look down with some honesty and clarity, and have a couple of people maybe around you who'll be completely honest with you, then you'll make better decisions. But when you're making it from emotion, you react. And when you make it from intellect, you respond. And you know, so what we say is sometimes take a 24-hour shower, because in 24 hours, things aren't as bad as they were, you know, and in 48 hours, a little better. And in 72 hours is usually when you can think clearly, especially if you think you made the wrong decision in going into the speaking business, or you picked the wrong lane, or everybody's talking about this, but I should be talking about this, but I don't know anything about it, you know,
Right.
and just being the jack of all trades and master of none, which is kind of the death knell of a speaker.
Well, and you will question yourself a million times over, right? When you do have maybe that off talk, or you're just like, am I really cut out for this? Or it takes a little bit more work than you anticipated to get those high paying engagements consistently. You'll want to quit a million times, but I love your advice because it's so incredibly important. Your voice is important. Your voice is vital, and people are laying awake at night praying for your solutions. If your voice isn't out there, they don't get to hear them from you, right? They don't get to receive them in a way that they can receive them from you, then they can't from other people. So if you shrink, then there's a lot of people out there missing out, and you're missing out on that life that you have already identified that you want. And taking that, what would you say, 24-hour shower? I love that. I've never heard that before. But also getting a different perspective. Remove yourself a little bit. Get that kind of bird's eye view once again, and then go back in, soldier. get back in there. You also said celebrate your victories, or at least note them. Like, note those victories along the way, and that does more than one thing. Number one, it shows you how far you've come, and what you've already overcome, and reminds you of why you're even doing what you're doing. But it also helps you stay relatable for those who are way back there, right? They're just beginning their journey, and you can remember how you felt, and because you will forget. You're going to evolve, and it's going to be sometimes hard to relate to the person you were when you first started out. So we call them celebrate your micro wins. I think it's very, very important. I love that you somehow figured out along the way, don't make it too complicated, right? Get out a spiral notebook and just write victories on the front, and start jotting those down as you notice them and notice them. Today you can get free apps like Trello, whatever, if you happen to be inclined in that direction. Just get them down, because they are very important. Again, foundational, important things to not skip, that people just like to skip right over.
Well, I think the biggest strength of certainly what I do is, and the biggest compliment I can give anybody is that they're real. People will come up to me and say, I want to know who the guy is, not the guy on YouTube. And I said, same person. Takes foot out of mouth, deprecate on stage and stuff, because, we all make mistakes, but it's what did you learn from it, and how are you helping your audience? And I always tell this story. A friend of mine called me up one day and he said, you lost a couple $1 million. And when someone says that to you, it gets your attention. I said, he said, because you don't know right away. You say, no, it's not going to work. And I said, so you lost a couple $1 million. And he started telling me the story. And I remember it was with my internet companies. And I said, no, it's not going to work. And he said, well, you lost a couple $1 million because you don't know two words. And the two most important words in business. And the two most important words in business is what if. And what if opens you to possibility thinking. What if it works? What if it, goes forward? So you can bet now I say what if all the time, or I ask my team, well, what would it look like? So that we could start opening up, because so many people are stuck in their references, and until they see another references, they can't believe that this is possible for them. So, what if, sometimes it just opens the door. Getting online with certain people, I always tell a story, is that I started wishing people happy birthday on Facebook. And I wished this one person happy birthday on Facebook. And he said, I've been thinking about you. And he was the vice president of China Telecom Americas, who became a client of mine for 2 years as a coaching client. He was never going to be the president because he was from Ecuador, but, that's how it happens. So you can bet I do that all the time, because you never know when all of a sudden someone says, oh, I was just thinking about you. And it's that right time. I mean, I just got a gig yesterday. But actually, Saturday, the vice president of the company called me because his team was looking at speakers and they didn't like the ones. And so I responded to him right away, and he sent me his email address, and I responded to him. And then I went into my CRM just yesterday, and a woman had opened, an HR director had opened up this survey that I sent out just on, what are your leadership needs? And then I looked, and guess what? She was the HR director for the vice president who just hired me. And I had gone for that speech in 2024, and she just opened it up. Well, she just opened up because the vice president said, now I got the person I want. Now, she was already in my CRM. Now, what does that say to me? Hey, I got to go through that again and see, because there's gold in there. So it's not just getting on stage, like my friend Shep Hyken said, and I think he's been on your podcast before. Mm-hmm. The hard part is not giving the speech. The hard part is getting the speech, but if you're not good on stage, you're not going to get anything. So it's, that mixed bag. And it's also about working on your business, which is, I've been the last month, I've really worked on my business, because there's a book called The E-Myth, and the E-Myth is called the entrepreneurial myth. And it says most people work in the business, which is what I call, tell my coaching clients, it's like the $5 activities on $100 time, stuff that you can get rid of. But when you're working on the business, you're working on your brand, etc. And my website has never looked good on mobile forever. And I've got the best web people on the planet. In Germany, they don't like stupid people, and that's why I like them. They fix things very quickly. And they could never get it right. And I got frustrated, and I just started experimenting with Claude Code, which I know nothing about. And I completely redid my website, where it is ranking high. And I just got someone who called me on ChatGPT yesterday from a major company that's on the stock exchange, wanting me to come speak at their leadership retreat. I said, how'd you find me? She said, ChatGPT. And it's because I had just redone my whole website with Claude. And I also made sure to have other eyes look at it, like ChatGPT, Perplexity, and say, do an audit on my website. And it came back and said, well, it's all about you, like, oh, how great you are. But it's not telling the client what you do for them. And that's where speakers miss it. It's like, what problems do you solve? How do you help them? And I solve a lot of problems, but it just wasn't on my website. So now it's speaking in their language. And if I go on and I ask Chat or anybody else and say, hey, tell me about Dr. Rick Goodman, it's now going from that position. And I can tie that leadership phone call directly to redoing that leadership retreat page, and then just 2 nights ago, looking at my website again, look and saying, hey, I'm cannibalizing things, which means I'm using the same keywords maybe a couple, 3 times, which means Google doesn't even know what's important. So instead of having, leadership retreats, because that was a page, we said how to plan a leadership retreat. And that went right up there. And that's how she found me. And that was 2 days. So it's continually working on your business, but, going back and looking and saying, does my stuff look old? Because if it does, those are people going to hire you. They're going to think, that you might be a Rotary speaker. And there's nothing against Rotary speakers, because I'm going to be speaking at Rotary on the 7th, because I used to be a Rotarian. So when I got it, I got excited, and I thought, I haven't spoken at a Rotary club in 20 something years. This will be fun, and that's giving back, because when you put good stuff
giving
out,
back, and it's also hearing what people are feeling and thinking right now in a really intimate setting. Who's that famous comedian that had a show forever? We all know him, Seinfeld. He still will try out some of his newer jokes, or just go to kind of dive hole in the wall comedy clubs to stay relevant, to because when you spend hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars to see him on a bigger stage, you want those jokes to land. You want to get what you paid for, and he understands that he can't forget the foundation, and you can get removed from that. So I love that you do that. Go you for that Rotary. They're very, very fortunate to be able to do that.
Do those things because, and literally, I just got my new speaker video version 8 back because I didn't like the first few, and then I need to tell a story, and within 30 seconds to a minute, and everybody has to have a video if you're going to get booked and paid. They got to know what you do, or they're clicking you right off. And I didn't know what I did in the first 30 seconds. So I kind of went through and pieced it. And the video looks unbelievable. I mean, it's like this only one little section, but it blew me away. And I was just so thrilled that I called my guy who usually lives in Nepal, but he was in India now. And I got him on WhatsApp, and I said, it's terrible. And you should have seen his face melt. And I go, it's terribly amazing. So he was so excited because he's kind of failing. But then I sent it to my 2 kids. See, because like you're saying, my kids are a little bit of superstars. My daughter produces rock concerts and comedy festivals. So she just did Marcelo Hernandez Netflix special. And my son manages the biggest comedians in the world, like Sebastian and Bert Kreischer, and his new comedian Cam Patterson's on Saturday Night Live as a regular. So I literally this morning said, will you be critical and tell me what you don't like about it? And those are the things you need. You need people to not say, oh, you're so great, which a lot of your friends will tell you, and then you wonder why you're not getting hired, versus somebody who says, no, this is bad, or I would have turned it off. And sometimes I'll say, just tell me what you think of it. And I know if they're telling me they really like it and I know it's terrible, I won't get their opinion against it because they're too nice. So find a buddy, an accountability buddy that will be honest with you. And you need that honest feedback. Don't take it personally, but take it as I'm going to work on this, and watch yourself. Because that's one of the things when they taped me, I didn't see how many times they said, oh, when I was on stage, I would say, you see, and that was a filler, but you don't see it. So when I started working with my athletes, they all watched the tape. The football players, when I was with the Rams, the Miami Heat, they all watch the tape. So they see what's going on because you can't see yourself. It's like if you've ever called your phone and listened to your voice, does it sound like you? Everybody says no, because we don't hear ourselves the way others do. So it's really important to look, and some of you may say, well, I'm pretty good. Or you may not like yourself, but that's also important because now you're going to remember what not to say or how to say something better. And sometimes it's a little tweak that you can make in a speech that will change the whole room. A friend of mine once watched me, and I told a story about these 2 women up in Maine that I went and stopped off the road, and I was looking for tips on lobster. And the woman, she gave me all this information, and I said, give me a hug. And she thanked me. And then she said, well, I really need that because my husband, we were married for 50 years and just passed away, etc. And my friend said, that's not enough. He said, when someone tell the story, he says, give me a hug and then let it go. And it was one little change, because as speakers, we're not just blah, 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 but we've got to act up there. You've got to show emotion so that the audience stays with you, and have those sets of eyes. Don't be afraid to have somebody critical look and say, well, maybe if you just change it a little bit. And that's how people improve as speakers. And most people don't do it because they're afraid of the criticism, or someone's going to tell them they're bad. But, so what?
You need that slap in the face every now and then.
Right. When
Because
you're
you're
crawl, you
close to
don't
it.
say they fall 50,000 times, and you don't say, oh, my kid's not going to fall anymore. Let me just put them in a stroller. So they're going to crawl till they run. So, that's one of the things, because people stop just short of success, and it's a business. So if you want to get into it and be serious about it, you treat it like a business, like anything else you would do, and you practice and you watch yourself and you ask other people to critique, and don't listen to everybody, because everybody's going to tell you something different.
People stop just short of success. I see that so often, and it's heartbreaking. And it's because they think the talk is the business. The talk is the fun part. That is very little to do with the actual business, right? Obviously, you need to deliver. You need to make promises and deliver on your promises when you're actually speaking or presenting. But really, the work, there's so much work that gets you to the place where you're in front of people. And I think most speakers underestimate that. Then they think, I don't know, they can get on some bureau or some agency and someone else is going to do all the work for them. Is that a serious business? You're not going to build a gas station on the corner and say, you build it. And when I start making profits, I'll throw you a little commission, right? It just doesn't work that way. It's great. Be with agents. I am an agent. Be on bureaus, but don't think that's your business. You own your business. You own those relationships. You talked about the gold mine of your data bank. Yeah, nurture that data bank, because there is gold in there. Someone, I think you said 2022, 2024, and now it's 2026 as we're recording this. There's never a no. There's a not yet, or this isn't the right timing. As long as you nurture those relationships, it will fruit in time. But I hear speakers all the time, Dr. Goodman, tell me about this part. Hi, I reached out to 60 people. Nothing happened. I guess I'm not cut out for this. I'm like, you're about 60,000 people short of reaching out to before you realize that it's going to work or not going to work.
Right. And they have things going on in their lives. I mean, I've got a client that just hired me for a very, very, very large fee. And I've been reaching out to her just about making her pre-conference videos so she could market it and stuff. And she called me and said, sorry, I haven't been able to get back to you because my dog's been sick. People got stuff going on. But here's the thing. Most people take it personally. I had another where I was applying for another major national association meeting, and the woman didn't call me back. And I called another national association, figuring that they knew these people. Could they put in a good word for me? And she didn't call me back. And then a week later, she called me back and said, Dr. Rick, I'm so sorry I didn't call you back. And I said, oh, I was wondering if you know anybody there. And she said, funny you should ask, because I was calling you to see if you would be a speaker at their conference. Now, what are the odds, And, full fee and everything. And she's like, you had the best session. Could you do the same exact session? I said, you won't believe it, but I already put the same exact session in for them. But you're my girl. You hired me once already. So I'm doing it for you. But again, you've got to put it out there. You got to pick up the phone because nobody else is doing it. And have a conversation, because I find I give good phone, and a lot of people don't know who I am because I didn't pick up the phone, and nobody could sell you better than you. You can get that opening or something like that, but you're the person who has to sell you. You can't just hire someone and say, sell me. And a bureau isn't going to want you until you start beating them out for business. And then they hear about you, or a client calls and they heard about you and they're like, well, let me call and see if I can book him so I can get my percentage. And, that's fine with me. I don't care. But that's the reality of it, and I don't, majority of my business 90% does not come from bureaus. It comes from word of mouth, people calling me.
It's great to be on them. It makes you a little bit more findable when people are looking for you, but I wouldn't hang my my business hat on it. It's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. So I just love your approach. And you said giving your audience a hug. I think also giving the decision maker a hug is very similar in that lead with outcome, lead with possibilities, lead with promise, lead with anything but resume, right? People don't know that they care about you until they know that they care about you. And they only care about you when they know what you can do for them, which is kind of the truth, right? So lead with that possibility, that promise, that potential transformation that you can bring to their audience, and then their ears open. Well, why are you the one to bring it? Then you bring in the resume. But even when you get up on stage, to me, the way to hug your audience is talk about them in ways it's like, what? How'd you know so much about me? How did you know what I'm feeling, what I'm going through right now, and the solutions that I'm looking for? It's because you did your homework, and it's because you're a pro. And you don't get up there and you're not leading with how fabulous you are. You're not leading with why they're privileged to be in your audience. You're leading with, you get them, that's your hug, and you're here to help them see how they can get past this thing, right?
Exactly. And I also go deep. So I do my homework before I have the meeting, and then we have a pre-programmed questionnaire. So, I'll usually say, if there were three things that can happen, you waved your magic wand, and these were the three things that happened when I was done. For you to say I was the best investment you ever made, what would those things be? And I'm going to make those things happen. And I tell them, I'm going to make you a hero. And I just did a company called Concord Hospitality Group, and they own 175 hotels around the country. And the head of HR had seen me speak at a small mini meeting, and then she kind of wanted to hire me. And again, it was one of those things where 2 years later, she finally called me, and I said, I'll make you a hero. And when I got done, she said, you did, and the place went crazy. And I brought the owners up on stage, and I brought the CFO who was retiring in 2 days, and had fun with him and interacted with him. So, it's about creating that experience. So with me, nobody ever gets the same experience. It's all personalized. And, the biggest compliment I've gotten usually is you knew our business more than most of our employees. And that's important, because I want that to be intertwined in the speech, so that it's always personal. It's about them. I'm not just mailing it in, because people can tell if you're doing that.
Brilliant.
Meeting with them before, after, and again, it's being a member of their team for the day is what I say.
Be a member of their team for the day. So what are decision makers looking for? Let's say these
Mitigating damage.
mitigating damage. Okay. How do you communicate that? How do you communicate to that to them?
Well, it's really your expertise and getting on the phone with them, and having evaluations and things that they can look at, because most of the time they're looking at you way before they pick up the phone. And, no different than this vice president of sales for this major real estate management company who called me on a Saturday and said, I was looking at your videos, looking at your stuff. I know your style already. So really, you've got to have good stuff out there. If you don't have good stuff out there, it's important. So even on my website these days, I've got articles from 2018, 2019, and I'm taking them down because they're thin. They're not supporting my brand anymore. So I'm going to get nailed by Google because it's not, worthwhile to have up there. So,
right. And you talked about
not better.
Don't set it and forget it, right? You need to stay relevant, fresh, current. You have to have that good stuff on there. So I know that we spend a lot of time and money on creating our perfect sizzle reel, our perfect demo reel, our perfect website, our perfect press kit. That's a living, breathing asset. You do it, but in 6 months, you got to put something fresh in there. You got to do something to make it relevant for the mood of today. What are those decision makers feeling? And you're never really marketing to the people who are in the seats. You're marketing to the decision makers in a way that convinces them that the people in the seats, their people, are going to walk away not just with a great feeling talk, but some real tangible strategies they can put into action. They're looking for experiences. You finding that, Dr. Goodman?
Yeah, and that was definitely the difference in the focus of what we did. And they want people to be involved. They want people being interactive. New meeting planners are also wanting some health thing or something like that, getting people up and moving. they're putting those into their programs. So everything that we do is an attempt to personalize it more, whether it's including our books or including a follow-up, to see how things are going. But until you get in front of that audience, and when we do, we have ways of capturing their information, getting, seeing their feedback, and, building our list. And there's also people in there that have referral business that, have somebody they want you to speak to. And, we get 2 or 3 of those every single time. Plus those evaluations we're able to share with other meeting planners, because when I say mitigate damage, they don't want their client to call them and say, why'd you hire the speaker? They were terrible. And I had a gig in July where the director of the association wanted somebody else. And then the committee said, no, we're going to go with this guy. And the director said, the guy was terrible. We're going with you this year. We don't care. So, that's really important, is to, one, find out deep by using a questionnaire, finding out what's important, going and doing the research on Perplexity, which is a great research tool and covers Claude and all these others. And I'll go on and put in the people's names. So I had a big investment firm that works with Charles Schwab and Fidelity and stuff, and they do the back room. And I did a quick Perplexity search on the 2 people I was going to do a story about, and it literally told me what's important to them. And I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this interview, and I'm going to ask the questions right from Perplexity, just for fun. And I did. And within 15 minutes, they said, you're our guy. We're hiring you. And I said, now I'm going to tell you and show you what I'm going to teach your people to do.
Nice.
And I showed them how I did the research on them. So I already knew, and they could do the same exact research on their clients and know what's important to their clients, and then show them how they can give their clients what they need. Because, everybody wants 4 things. They want solutions, they want pain relief, they want results, and they want to know, how long is it going to take? Are you the right person? That's it. And if you can give them those things, that's important. So that's why our brand shifted from look at me to, this is what we do for you, so that you can have all these things. And even on our meeting planners page, the copy says, the speaker that meeting planners book over and over again. Mm-hmm. And that's going to cause somebody to say, well, why? Well, here are the results. People are happy. They, I'm friendly with all the people that hire me because I'm a friendly person. I tell them right away, I'm going to be the easiest person that they ever work with, because there are, believe it or not, prima donnas out there that people.
No, don't be a diva.
Yeah. And that's not who I am. So I can't even understand that model, but I'm just happy to get to do what I do. This is my fun. And that's the blessing that we get when we get on stage. So, to be that diva, it cuts off. And the biggest compliment I got, I saw somebody wrote an evaluation. I did a program called The Next Big Thing. And I must have been helping some of the people that worked at the hotel or something. And you never know who's looking at you. And in the evaluation, she said, I didn't know he was the speaker. And he was helping all these people. And then he got on stage, and I thought, wow, he is completely real. And to me, that was such a great compliment. It was just being me, but someone noticed, because you never know who's looking at you. So, from the first people I go to is the AV people, because they're the most important people. They can make you sound good, or something goes dead, like a battery in your mic. It messes things up. So those people are very important. So if you're on TV, the person who called you on the phone to invite you is the person who got you on TV, not the person who interviewed you, the on-air talent. They don't know nothing. It's that other person. So those are just little things that, as you start to evolve, and you have the knowledge, but the first thing is get good, videotape yourself. So watch yourself. It's the hardest thing to do.
I hope people are taking notes, because there's so much brilliance in what you are sharing. And these are hard-earned nuances and strategies that you picked up by doing it for the years that you've been doing it. So I know by this stage of the show, there are plenty of SpeakPact audience members who want to know, how do I get a hold of Dr. Rick Goodman? What are some of the ways you like to be found, Dr. Goodman?
I am everywhere on the web, as my kids would say. When they said to my daughter, you're not really social, she said, my dad makes me look like that. And she was on TV with me all over the place. So Rick Goodman is the direct one. So we'll give that to your audience. My books are The Solutions-Oriented Leader and Living a Champion Life.
Solutions-Oriented Leader, living a champion life.
Yeah. So this I wrote when I was a doctor for the St. Louis Rams when they went from worst to first and won the Super Bowl in the Miami Heat. But it was all
Ooh.
about what we would call the soft skills back in the day. And now I call them the essential skills. And my publisher
Mhm.
said, you need to take out the Palm Pilot and the BlackBerry, but these things are important things. Like the Victory book is in there. Goal setting techniques, how to communicate more effectively, how to manage your time more effectively, because these are the things that we need to do as speakers, to the point where I even have on my desk here where we're recreating my schedule, where I have, what we want to make and stuff like that. And it's a goal list from 2025. So it literally has my schedule on it, Monday through Friday, because we have what gets scheduled gets done. So, and the goal is a minimum of 20 calls a day. Because if you're reaching 20
Minimum.
people a day, you're at 100 people a week and 400 people a month, you'll probably get a couple of gigs. Someone will get to know you better, but most people go, oh, I can't make 400 phone calls. It's just eating that elephant one bite at a time.
That's our business model. That's what we do for speakers, because you cannot make a call or 10 a week and expect that level of success that you've achieved and that you're continuing to scale. There's just no way. It needs to be hundreds of people every week, new touch points, at minimum 120 every week. But then you're doing touch points with even more than that, because you're nurturing the ones that you have already reached out to. That's what it takes. And it's a lot, and you can't do it alone. You have a team around you, because you take your business seriously, which goes right into my next question. How do you turn a talk into a viable, strong 6-figure or better business? How do you just take this great talk you're good at and create a whole business about it?
I think you've got to get out and tell people. First, you got to find out what the people's problem is. A lot of times people create and then sell. I sell and then create.
Mm.
It's totally because, you can't, one is if nobody's buying it, it doesn't make a difference. You could have the best thing in the world. It doesn't make a difference. So I'll sell and create first. And I need to know what's keeping them up at night. What is their pain? Because I wrote the solutions-oriented leader, not the solutions-oriented flower. And that's what people want. They want solutions. And they will pay for those solutions. What's keeping them up at night were those things. And a lot of times it's the same in most businesses these days. People are having challenges, retaining their best people, engaging at a higher level, people, finding the right people, and they're right there in front of them. And then there's a big gap right now in what I call middle management, because we have the gray hairs like me, so to speak, and then the young people, but there's nothing in between. And I find that, I'm the person who my mentor was 30 years ago. When I looked up to Dr. Larry Marks, and he was that guy, and I'm going to be like him. And now I am him, and those people are like my kids and stuff. So, those are one of the things, but it's really about, what is your brand? What do you talk about? What's your passion? And is there a market for that? Because a lot of people go, oh, I love this. Well, who are you selling it to? I'm going to write a book about this. Who's going to be buying that book? What's your target market? And are you qualified to buy that book? I mean, I had a girl say, could you read this book for me? And she lived in my building, and it was about, successfully dating. Well, she was not successfully dating. How could you sell what you don't own? So those are the things that we look at, and some of us don't realize. So go ask, your friends and say, if you were to describe me, what's the word that would come to your mind? What do you think about when you think about me? And I asked the speaker this, the very famous speaker, and it kind of blew me away, because he said, if you don't ASK, you won't GET. And been saying it for years, but I never thought of that as someone looking at me thinking that way. And he's right. Because I fly first class all the time. I haven't bought a first class ticket in 100 years, but I go up and, someone's usually complaining to the person at the front desk. And I'll say, I know if you could get us out, you would do it. I'm sorry that person was complaining to you. You don't have anything in first class. And I say, sure, we have one seat left. And again, if you don't ask, you don't get. So, you've got to ask people, what's your biggest challenge? What's going on? Do the homework first, see, and then say, I find that many of my clients are having the same problem. Are you having this issue? Great. Now here's what we do. Now you become that solution. Now you can have that conversation. One of the best lines that I use that I will give away here is I will say to someone, is this a bad time? And the reason is because I've said, is this a good time? And almost 99% of the time they say no. So I say, is this a bad time? And they say no. And now I'm in. And now I'm 20 minutes later, I'm talking to them because the knee-jerk reaction is to say no. So now they're like, oh, now I'm like, great. And, I've gotten gigs like that just because I've said, is this a bad time? And nobody has said to me, yes, it's a bad time.
Love that. And, I hear this all the time too, Dr. Goodman, and you basically just answered this whole last question already. So I'm going to highlight it. People are always saying, well, it's such a saturated market. It's such a saturated market. You can't really make it in the speaking corporate training space anymore. It is not saturated. It's saturated in the early launch, but there are very few speakers who are willing to pay the cost, like you've spoken about in this whole interview. So once you get beyond that first marker, right, that it gets thinner and thinner, and basically you're standing out because you are still there. You're still the last man standing, right? You're still there. And so there's relationships you started nurturing 2 years ago. We're going to say, oh, I guess you are serious about this business. I guess you are somebody to take seriously. And that's just one little part of the whole bigger picture. Is you're paying your dues. Either you or you're hiring a team to make sure that your name is getting put in front of the right fit decision makers day after day, year after year, while you're off on stage or you're on vacation with your family. That outbound cannot stop, because then you don't have a job 6 months later, right? You've got a clear calendar 6 months later. That's a serious person who believes not only in themselves and their message, but in those audiences who are out there waiting for them. Then they don't even know they're waiting for them yet.
Well, if you think about it this way, there's 3 frogs sitting on a lily pad and one decides to jump off. How many are left? 3, because they just decided. And
they decided to jump off.
They didn't take action. So because so many people decide in their whole lives, well, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to write. I can't tell you how many people say, I'm going to write a book, or I'm going to do this. And, years later, they haven't done it. And again, I've been in that place where the Championship Life could have come out 2 years ago, and then I finally sat down, I turned it into like a book report, forced myself to do it. Now it's in Spanish, Viviendo una vida de campeón, because I live in Miami. We've got a lot of Latins all around the country. So I want to open up another market because people kept saying, do you have it in Spanish? So I thought, why not? So we got it in Spanish, we got it all done, and put it on Audibles and stuff like that. So if you could think it, you can do it. But the key is just taking action, and you'll find that when you just do it and you don't look back, it's kind of like when you were young, you didn't know enough to not take action. You didn't have your fear there. You would just do things, And then as the world started knocking you down and you got rejected a little bit, you built up that I don't want to get turned down, rejected feel, and you just stop, trying to do it. So when it's not even try, it's just risk a yes, and you'll be surprised. And I do the same thing. Sometimes I'll finally I won't make phone calls for a couple of days, and I'll finally go make those phone calls, and then someone loves it, and I'm like, why didn't I do this before? And it just kind of reinforces it, because you've got to be self-disciplined. So that's why I create a schedule for myself, because I think of it like I'm in school, because if I'm on my own. So I know it's first period, second period, third period, fourth period. No different than my philosophy on listening to programs in your car. I'd say if I knew my schoolwork like I knew my music, I'd be a straight A student. You all know the favorite words, your favorite songs, but you can't remember the king of Mesopotamia. Now, if you make that a study, you'll know all that good stuff, because you'll be hearing it in your head. And, once you hit all the senses, because as a speaker, you have to do the same thing. You have to have them. You're going to be talking to people that are audibles, people kinesthetic, people more expressive. So you've got to appeal to each member of that audience so that you hold their attention. And that's why I'm using PowerPoint. I'm using this so that I'm hitting all those people, and I'm not losing them. Because if you're just a talking head, you lose them.
When you couldn't do that if you didn't understand them, and you couldn't understand them if you didn't do your homework. So it's
Right.
this whole beautiful ecosystem. Such good stuff.
What a concept.
Okay, Dr. Goodman, my signature close. And that is there something that you can give the SpeakPact audience to act on a challenge that they can go out and actually put into practice today that will get them that scaled speaking or corporate training career that they're looking for?
I would say make a list of the top 100 people that you know that could possibly, help you, etc. Because, and as I go through my CRM system, that's what's happening. Just think, I said, what if I would have called Dara a month ago? Her vice president wouldn't have had a look on his own because I already had in communication. So one of the things I do now is I go and look, and when anybody has a conference, I put in my CRM, because you have to have a CRM system or you'll forget. 60 days after that conference, I call them to see when they're going to start planning their next conference. I don't call them right away because they're just coming off the high, they're exhausted or whatever. So 60 days after, that's when I do it. Now, sometimes you miss because some people plan a year or two in advance, but 60 days now, and I have that in my file, and then I go through the calls. So pick your top 100. If you don't have that, pick the top 10 or 20 people that you know and say, who do you know is hiring speakers? And let them know, because you could be the biggest secret. They may not even know what you do. And then they say, oh my God, I didn't know you do that. And now you're off to the races. So,
Good stuff.
it's important, but get that list going, because that'll build confidence. And here's one other thing is, in my CRM system, I have pictures of everybody in the system these days. So if I don't have your picture, I go on LinkedIn and I put your picture, because it's a lot easier to make a phone call when I see a smiling face than if I don't know the person on the other end of the phone. I may think they're like an ogre or something, or they're gonna not like me or whatever. We all have that stuff going on. So if I see their picture and they got this nice smiling face, it's so much easier to make the phone call.
That's a great
Sounds
tip.
weird, but it's true.
I love that. I love that tip. And the fact that you understand that if you're a serious business, you need a serious business ecosystem, right? You need a CRM. You need to nurture and follow up. We actually give it 2 weeks, only because I was a producer of very large scale events early in my career for many years. And I knew we were hitting the ground running, a week after, right? Looking for our next speakers. So quick, because you're right. You're exactly right. They're already looking for the speakers for their event that's going to happen a year from now.
Right. Yeah. No, they're booking 2027 right now. So, you may get some at the end of the year that are still making decisions, but, that's where our forward is. Or getting, I say manna from heaven when they just call you and say, hey, we need somebody in 2 weeks or tomorrow, and then, someone canceled on them. So I always like to ask those questions, or were you just not thinking about it? So, we get that
100 people, 100, we can all come up with 100 people. I think once you start doing it, you will realize, I think just saying, oh my gosh, 100 people. But once you start doing it, you're going to realize it could even be a family member that works for IBM, or as a, VP of marketing for Bank of America, whatever it is. They have a boss or management that are probably looking for corporate trainers to come in. They can make the introduction, or at least give you the name, right, of the person if they don't want to make the introduction for whatever reason, because they're your family member and they were just rolling around with the dog in the backyard with you.
I'll tell you a funny story. My best friend from 6th grade, we've traveled the world together, and he knows what he does, but he's never seen me speak or anything. And he's on the board at UCF, and they built this thing called the Forum, and it's like inside the actor's studio. And the head of the business school, Dean Jarley, said, do you know anybody? And my friend said, I think, my friend may. And he called me, he's like, would you do this? And there was no fee for it, but I thought it'd be really cool. And I walked into UCF, which is now the largest college in the US, and all around were pictures of me. And they had this little forum there. And I got up and I did an hour, and my friend was speechless, because he just knows me as Ricky Goodman, who's traveled the world. He's known since 6th grade. We wrestled together, all this stuff. He's never seen me on stage. And the dean was blown away and gave me great, and they brought me back again. And I was the first person to do it. And he was a partner in Grant Thornton, one of the largest accounting firms in the world. But he never thought of me in that light because he hadn't seen me. And his son, who's almost like my son, was a student there. I had him introduce me, and he couldn't believe it, because my son manages the biggest comedians in the world, just saw me speak and forgot about a year ago. And it's like, Dad, you're real good. Now, for my son to say that was the biggest accomplishment of my life, because he's very difficult, a judge of that. But again, you never know. But unless you start taping yourself, you start putting yourself out there, risking a yes, and getting involved. The more people you meet, the more business you'll do. It's a numbers
Brilliant
game.
way to end. Brilliant way to wrap this up. You brought so much gold today. I think this is one that our SpeakPact audience will be listening to more than once. You brought so much, Dr. Goodman. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Rick at rickgoodman.com, right? Rick at rickgoodman.com, or to pick up his books. He's got multiple books. Definitely look him up and grab one of his books. You're going to obviously be richer for it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And to the SpeakPact audience, ciao, ciao for now.
Thank you for listening to the SpeakPact podcast. To become a recommended speaker of Antoniette's WPC speaker agency, or you are a host or planner looking for a dynamic expert in optimized performance, Antoniette would like to personally meet with you. Secure a time with her at speakerbooker.com. Again, that is speakerbooker.com. It all begins with a vision, a voice, and a pact to impact. Join the SpeakPact movement by joining our new private Facebook group at the link in our show notes. Find us on nearly every social media platform at One Antoniette. That's number 1, ANTONIETTE, or simply hashtag SpeakPact.